Okay, so that he would, it's 5 o'clock, he would tell us the mission is they're going live. Okay, so we have to start on that way and come in, I guess. Okay. So is he gonna tell you when,
Yeah, you can go live now. This went live.
when to go ahead and start?
Mhm.
So he will tell you when I should
And we
go ahead. Ready?
can we start? Okay, he's Dr. Burrows is trying to get on.
Say what, know where it goes.
Yes, you can start now.
Good afternoon. We're glad to have you join us again at another edition of Leading Leaders. This week, we are coming to you from the offices of the president of the Liberia Baptist Missionary Convention, right here on the campus of the Liberia Baptist Theological Seminary. So again, we say, see you every Wednesday, right here at 5 o'clock on Radio Harvest Intercontinental, FM 103.5, and also on the Leading Leaders Facebook page. We're glad that you can join us every week right here on this platform. On this program, we discuss the issues of leadership with only one purpose in mind: to become better versions of ourselves. Here we promote working together and learning from one another, elevating our leadership in order to fulfill God's purpose for us where God has placed us. Again, we say welcome. It's always a pleasure having you join us in this public space and on this precious platform. Today we're having a guest, and my co-host will introduce that guest to you. So remember, throughout the broadcast, you can call us right here on the Radio Harvest Continental at 08880 434 555, 0880 434 555, or 0770 104 409. That's 0770 104 409. Again, let me welcome my co-host, Laura. Welcome, Ms. Laura.
Thank you, Pastor Sam. I'm hoping, and I'd like for our tech folks at the radio station to let us know if you are hearing us or if there's a problem with the sound, okay? So you can, send me a message to let me know, because we can't hear ourselves on the radio or on Facebook Live. So let us know how we're doing. That's number one. Number two, glad to be here. So excited to have our special guest with us, Dr. C. Patrick Burrows. a Liberian historian, I would say a Liberian history expert, who I have come to know, respect, and love as a brother, and excited to be able to hear Dr. Burrows talk to us about leaders, and really focusing on historical leaders. And it's critical. It's critical right now that we have this conversation about leadership, as Providence Baptist Church, the first church in this nation, is celebrating 200 years being here in Liberia as a church, but also next year, the nation will be celebrating 200 years as well, that the first, I believe, first group of settlers landed here. And so we need to have a conversation. Those folks who took that journey to come here were certainly leaders, probably in very different ways. And so we're going to look at some of those figures in our history, and learn about, because there's things that we can learn from those historical figures about leadership today.
Right, because I think about the last time we had Dr. Boris here, we talked about, I think, an old vision for a new nation, if I can remember it right, because there were some things that new Liberia, there's some things that our forefathers and foremothers, had in mind, a passion of their heart, and God's leading for them and for this nation that they started with, and we, as we move ahead and look at where God is taking us, we need to also remember, who they were. What are some of the things that they had in their hearts for this country as we move forward? Because I think, we say here, if we're going to plant the new mat, we need to sit on the old one. The old one helps you, guide you in the process of the new one. So all of that process is so important. So that's why we're glad to have Dr. Boris here. He's going to be here for a few weeks, and we're going to begin to get other historians, and this Leading Leaders program is going to begin to take some new shape. And this is the dynamism of this program that we also love. It takes on new shapes every now and then. We bring in new scholars and people who have love for Liberia, and then again, like you said, Providence is celebrating the bicentennial, 2021. Liberia will be celebrating her bicentennial of our brothers and sisters who returned, to Liberia in 1822. So all of that stuff is important. So Dr. Boris, here is it. We're glad to have you.
Thank you, Pastor Sam, and thank you, my sister, for this invitation. I'm always glad to be with you on this program. And I do want to take the both of you back a few years, because at the moment we're hearing a lot about, the plans to commemorate 2022, right? And there is an ongoing effort to do this on an international level. But I want to be clear and let the audience understand that Pastor Sam was very involved and instrumental in making this happen. It started because he was focused on the church and the role of the church. But at the time, and I remember us meeting at your house a few times, a few years ago, but at the time, nobody that I knew of was talking about commemoration. And I remember, drafting letters that were sent, and we'll leave it at that. And the lukewarm responses, that might have been received at the time. But this is the importance of vision, and this is the importance of leadership. And so what was being done in that early stage and being done on a limited basis in terms of making sure that the church's role was recognized has resulted now in this larger, international effort that is ongoing. But that vision and that effort, goes back, I remember, to your living room. And so I just want to acknowledge that, and to let the public, the larger public, know that sometimes, the good players don't get the jerseys. It depends if the team is well organized, and, in that case, as we say in Liberia, the good players don't have to fight for the jersey. But this is one of those cases where People just do the work, and the work speaks for itself, whether there's an acknowledgement or not. And I think
Amen.
that's in keeping with the tradition, of the Baptists in Liberia.
Yes, yes, that's exactly the case, right?
Mhm.
And like you said, even in those early meetings, we're also talking about the bigger picture of how this thing affects Liberia, and
Sure.
where Liberia will go and benefit from it.
Sure.
We even heard
Absolutely.
about this, people planning and work and doing things in Ghana and folks coming in
Yes.
Sierra Leone, but,
Yes.
it's our time, so we do what we can, and we're gonna help the government, however way possible, as we can to, help get that other part of it next year going as well, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we prepare for these celebrations, and we're trusting that a part of the celebration will be the learning of the history, right? That people will
Absolutely.
dig into their history, and that it would be so for Liberians, but also for the broader diaspora.
Yes.
That people would begin to learn history. Pastor Sam and I were talking today about, and you're going to talk about it in a minute, but about those folks who return, and that even folks who would even come home to Liberia now, that they would be returning as well. And I want you to, as we begin to have this conversation, Dr. Rose, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I'm going to jump into the spot right now. We're going to talk about three folks from the States, one from the States, and then two who are here, who are leaders in the Baptist tradition. But there's a term that you want us to clarify as we begin this conversation. A lot of times when we have conversations, we use words that are either not appropriate or often misunderstood. And so as we have this conversation, you talked about the use of the word ex-slave and why that is not a good term. Can you expound on that before we even get into the conversation?
Oh, yes, absolutely. You see, what we have a habit of doing as Liberians is to copy other people in how they talk and what they say and what they do. And then it sticks with us. And oftentimes the people who we were copying move on and they do things differently for one reason or the other. And then we are left doing things in their way, but from long periods back. So it was common 20, 40 years ago to hear some Americans refer to people of African descent who were in the Americas, refer to them as slaves. Today, you won't hear it. You won't hear it in most contexts, in part because of the work that has been done by our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. To call someone a slave is to diminish and deny their humanity. People were enslaved. To be enslaved means that somebody was doing this. Somebody was putting people in that position. But no matter how much they sought to diminish people, they didn't achieve it. They didn't succeed in those objectives. The humanity that God has invested in all of us was maintained even in those circumstances. And so it is important for us not to join in that train of taking away, or diminishing the humanity of our ancestors. And so I don't use that term, and that's why I don't. In fact, I think that the people who came to Liberia, it is best to refer to them as repatriates. Repatriates. It goes back to the root of the word, which is from Latin. Meaning to return, and patria, it means fatherland. But here we're talking about the ancestral lands. So repatriate doesn't mean that somebody is going back to their country, but they're going back to their ancestral country.
Right.
That is what those people were doing. So when we use these words, then we are in fact capturing our own experience from a Liberian perspective, and we are unifying our people. Another reason why I don't use the term ex-slaves is because when people use this term today, it's usually intended to be divisive, and they apply it solely to the brothers and sisters who came from the Americas. The reality is that during that era, during that period, people of African descent were being enslaved on both sides of the Atlantic. I don't know if you're hearing me. People of African descent were being enslaved on both sides of the Atlantic. And so when those brothers and sisters arrived in Liberia, the area that is now called Liberia, they met people on the coast who were being enslaved, who were being severely compromised by the ongoing transatlantic slave trade. Women
And
were being
the same
separated.
conditions, I was just interjecting, the same conditions many months or years or so, or decades or so prior, when they left, that they came out or they came back and met some of the same conditions.
Amen, yes. And so what happened then is that because this was the case, that laid the basis for the creation of this thing we call Liberia. If we don't understand that, you cannot understand and appreciate the founding of Liberia and why it lasted. So, so the other thing I would say to you is that I don't also accept the reference to an ethnic group in Nimba as Gio, because Gio also means slaves. The people of that ethnic group call themselves the Don. I would defer to them in using the name that they have for themselves. Outsiders referred to them at one time as Gio, and the name stuck. And now we find other people from other ethnic groups calling people Gio, calling them out of their name, so to speak. And so what I'm calling on Liberians is for us to make a commitment this year as we're moving forward that we're going to stop using derogatory words for each other.
So Dr. Boris, because we may have to look through the history of the viewer to identify, I'm sure the word Gio is not the only one that we've labeled ourselves, but come to think about it, we have different tribes. So we have the Bassa. Now that tribe we have already labeled, and that label was put on that tribe many, many years ago. And historically, many of us don't know why, don't know the meaning. And so we have accepted that label as a descriptive for a whole group of people. And my goodness, how many of us in Liberia know the meaning of that descriptive and the implications and all of that, so that it begins to break it down so that we say, Gio, it's almost like, people of color in the US, some of us call ourselves, with the N word, and we take it for fun and stuff, but it's so derogatory that if we realize what it is, we should stop. But you raise an issue, because I think in this era of our celebration in 2022 of, the return of the repatriation of our brothers and sisters, man, that would be something to take on, to say, what are some of these descriptives? We got the Gio. What are some of the other ones, so that they can be part of the national narrative as we plan and work. I would like to see the glass half full. So this statement is not seeing the glass half empty. We're going to celebrate next year, but we would have got, this is October, But yeah, okay, let's do what we can and get the ball rolling, But I'm thinking that there has to be in that national narrative that we talk about throughout next year is something like this. The Gio, what are some of the other descriptors that we have placed on ourselves, that we can begin to come to grips with.
Yes.
So I'm hearing, Dr. Burroughs, if I can jump in real quick, I'm hearing you say from you and Pastor Sam that it's not even just the descriptors that we place on ourselves, but the descriptors that we received from others that we've internalized or accepted and owned and allowed them to own us. So this can be a year of liberation as well, a year of the healing of our identities and reclaiming our true identity, if you will.
Yes, both internally and then as a collective, you know. And then I hear what Pastor Sam is saying, you know, I've spent my life working on the humanities of Liberians, the humanities, right? So when the British talk about the humanities, they're talking about teaching the children Shakespeare. But when we talk about our humanities, then we have to embrace spider stories and all of the oral traditions that were handed down, you know, by our people, because in those stories there are lessons for us, historical and otherwise, right, about morality and so forth. And so having spent my lifetime working with the humanities of the Liberian people, I know that there are one or two of these terms that are around. Many of the descriptors are okay. Yes,
but you know, I haven't been to any of the meeting. I've had representation at the meetings. There's planning for the bicentennial.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yes?
Okay.
Okay, we're back.
Yeah, we're back. We're back.
Okay. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah, we go.
Yes,
Okay.
I can hear you. All right. To our many listeners out there, yes, you're listening to Leading Leaders right here on FM 103.5 Radio Harvest Intercontinental. We just experienced a brief internet problem, so we're back on. We're glad that you stay with us.
We're on Facebook Live.
And we're still on Facebook Live. So thank you for staying with us. Okay, we were talking about, you know, how do we deal with the issue of these negative descriptives, you know, that we place on ourselves, that we have owned, that we have allowed somebody else to place on us. And then I was just going into the fact that, you know, as we plan for the 2022, these things must be part of the narrative.
Yes.
So that we can deal with them. In fact, I have not been to any of the meetings because I've been out of the country, but I've heard, I'm back now, but I've heard that someone or someone's have suggested that instead of just planning for a one-year event in 2022, over the next 20-something years, Liberia turns 200, 26 years. And perhaps we take the next 26 years, Dr. Borrow, to give us a chance to deal with this issue, so that when we come to celebrating our 200th anniversary as a nation, we may have come a long way in starting the process of dealing with some of these issues, you know, with our humanities. Maybe 26 years can help us come to grips with some identifying our own humanity.
I agree that it's a process, you know, it's not an event. But I think that every journey, even of 1,000 miles, it starts with the first step. And I think that more than anything else, Liberians, we have to commit ourselves to learning our true history.
Right.
Our true history. You see, there was a time when non-Liberians took it upon themselves to write a history for us. And that history is problematic, and it is not accurate. And we have not questioned them. We allowed it to go, to be accepted, and we're suffering the consequences of it. For anybody who lived in a village in Liberia, you know that you can use the river or the creek for multiple purposes. You can get fresh water from the creek, right, to cook or to drink. But if you're going to do your bodily functions in the creek, you don't do it upstream and then you're going to take the water from downstream. You get the clean water from upstream and then you do whatever it is that you're doing downstream. We are drinking our history from the section of the creek that other people have done their bodily functions in, and it has
Wow.
poisoned us. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. And this is pertinent to 1822, which we're about to commemorate. All right.
Yes.
There is a transcript of the negotiations that took place for the purchase of a little piece of land at Cape Mesurado that would become the center of Monrovia. There's a transcript. The negotiations between the local rulers and one American agent, Stockton, and a representative of the ACS heirs. The
Yes,
transcript
from Princeton.
exists. Okay, a transcript exists, and it records the comments back and forth of the chiefs. Now, in those negotiations, there was a resident of Cape Mesurado who was involved as the scribe and translator for our local rulers. His name was John Mill. Mill was educated in Liverpool. He spoke English very well. And he was engaged in the negotiations back and forth, explaining both ways. Okay. At those negotiations, the local rulers, Peter and others, had reached a consensus about granting this land. And right around that time, two people appeared from Freetown. One had worked on a slave ship, and the other was himself a slave trader. They arrived and they said, don't give these people this land, because if they come, they will disrupt the slave trade. You hearing me? I hope people in the audience are hearing this.
Right.
Yes.
So they talk. At the end of that day, after listening to them, and then Stockton explained himself, one of the men said, I worked on a slave ship and were not doing anything bad, just carrying slaves. And then Stockton came and seized the ship that we're on. And Stockton said, let me explain to the chiefs. He said, I did it. And I did it because the ship was in violation of our laws in America, and the countries that are involved, have been involved in this trade. They said, we'll not do it anymore. So the person who owned that ship was violating international law. We had a right to intercept it. You might not know that, but I'm explaining this to you. Long story short, after all of those back and forth conversations, our ancestors who were on the ground signed the agreement for that land to be used for that purpose. What they were saying, in effect, is that we hear what the slave traders are saying, but we don't agree. We know that these people who are coming are against the trade, but we are with them. So what we have in the founding of Liberia was a coalition of people on the ground and people who were coming, who were committed to ending this traffic. The traffic was disruptive. It was tearing families apart. It was destroying the agriculture and the development of our region. And people could see this, and they said, you know what, enough already. We want schools, we want our children to be educated, and so forth. These people can come here, it will be better for everybody. So that's the beginning of Liberia. But that's not a story that they have told us, you see?
No.
Okay.
No. And if I'm right, after hearing about the actual reason why Liberia, die. I mean, what happened in the house with the candle and all that.
Yes.
And it's for too long, I think, has been told that he was getting ready to fire on the natives. Or I think what I realized is that there were slave traders, colonists along the coast.
Yes.
That he was trying to deal with.
Yes.
And in the midst of all of that, that accident happened that took his life.
His life,
and it's amazing because I'm trying to get this book out that I will send something to you soon to start helping put some. I'm trying to put some finishing touches to it for December. How Baptist birth led and influenced the growth of Christianity in Liberia, the history of Providence Baptist Church. And I'm finding out some of these new things. And I think I read that script, that you just mentioned, and I said, oh my goodness. So how the stories, are retold so that people can know actual stories are so important.
Yes,
And I
absolutely.
think the stories also breed division.
Right.
Yes.
The wrong side of the story.
Yeah,
Right.
and so then and when a nation divided cannot stand.
Exactly.
Which of course, those who want to abuse and misuse the resources for their own good will benefit if there's division and chaos and confusion. And also the people don't know their own history. They don't know the beauty and the power of their own history.
Yes, that's it. That's it. And I think that's why it's so important that we begin that journey, committing ourselves to learning our true history as we move forward. We can heal the nation and we can accomplish so much together. But that's the beginning. But you called me here to talk about, the Black Baptist leadership. And so I want to make sure we get to that.
Let's go there.
I mean, you can't go there without starting where you started. So, it's to put things in perspective, because those places have led us to this place, and those events, the proper chronicling of those events will help us understand, where we are, and someone even told me in some of this, I'm hearing third hand because I haven't been in the meetings, that someone said, why is the church needed in all of this stuff? And then somebody corrected that person who I think, was naive enough to not know the truth, that there's no Liberia without the church. In this case, Providence Baptist Church, because it was the church that came here that brought all of this. So it's the coming together of these two institutions. And I haven't read it. You're the more astute historian. I haven't read it anywhere else in any other history like it is here in Liberia, where a church gave birth to a nation, and all of the things that started after that, and so, that's the history. Nothing you can do about it, so go, Ms. Laura.
Well, and I think too, Dr. Burroughs, as you get ready to start, Pastor Sam and I were talking earlier about, we've actually been having a workshop at the church. And one of the things that one of the leaders said is that Liberia, they believe is called to be a light to the continent. And then, and the light to Liberia is the church. When you're gonna talk a little bit, you're gonna talk about Colin Teague, and later on, we're gonna talk about Lot Carey. But those two men, those two co-laborers came here, yes, for freedom, but they also came as a response to a calling that they felt from God to bring the word and to bring Christianity to their brothers and sisters on this side. And we would be remiss if we don't talk about the role of the church and the leaders who paved the way in the church that actually led to the founding of what we now know is Liberia. So I just want, and I also want to say, as an African-American who is now calling Liberia a home, that I too can call myself a repatriate. And I also need to learn this history that I might also share with my brothers and sisters on the other side who need to know this connection, that we can get a sense of the broader family that which we are all a part of.
Yeah, so I would say this, Laura, in response to you, and that is, if you look at academics in the US, scholarship in the US and in the West, as the societies became more secular, people became less church-going, less religious, then the scholars too adopted that attitude. And the historians will examine people who were Christians, and then they'll say, let's put the Christianity aside. Let me look at this man's other values. But you are actually doing violence. You're being inaccurate when you try to study somebody, a piece of that person. You don't look at the other part of what motivated them. So if you're studying someone in history from the past who was a Christian, You take their values into account, all of their values, right? Because the story won't make sense if you remove the Christian part. But some of our academics, Liberian academics, who are themselves secular, that's how they treat the story of Liberia. They rather not deal with the religious part, so they put it aside and they pretend that it wasn't important. Now, I'm saying that, and I'm saying it's true for all sectors, all groups, to try and understand the behavior of Sao Boso, for example. He was Muslim, and you want to understand his Islamic tradition, because drinking liquor was not acceptable to him. But I don't want to go off on a tangent. I'm just simply saying that I pay that respect to everybody, and I understand it, as a Christian myself. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so Dr. Burroughs, let's start with the story. I know that you're going to start with 1821. We're going to talk about three figures in history, but focus really on Colin Teague. So I'm going to let you take it, and then we'll jump in with questions as we see fit. And if there's questions I'm looking at the Facebook feed, we'll bring those questions in. And if callers call in, we'll try to bring those in as well. So we're going to give it to you and let you tell us the story, please.
Well, what I would start with is to say to you that before Colin Teague, you asked me to speak about Colin Teague, and I will keep going back to his friend Lord Carey, because they moved together, in a lot of ways. But next week, people will hear more about Lord Carey. So Colin Teague and Lord Carey were enslaved in Virginia. But they found a way, they made a way out of no way. We're talking about leadership here. And I'm saying this, and I want to put an underscoring to this. They made a way out of no way. Because today, you can hear a lot of Liberians talking about, we don't have this is not working the way it should, and it's true. But for a lot of young people, what I want to say to them is that it is still possible for you to seize on what is available and maximize what you have.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
yeah, that's what they did. So Teach was working. He was an artisan. He worked with leather. He would make saddles and different leather products, shoes, and so forth. And so the person that he was on the plantation of leased him out to work in a shop. And that the owner of the shop was paying the person who had a plantation. Colin Teague was working in the shop and was putting money aside. He ended up buying his family from slavery. He paid the plantation owner to say, I'll take my children and my wife. Here's the money for them. That's an act of leadership. And Lord Carey did the same thing on his side. His first wife had died, but he did it for his children. He was working in a tobacco warehouse, and he was in a supervisory role. So the owner of the tobacco shop, the warehouse, saw in him certain qualities and made him a supervisor. And at that time, there were white people working in that warehouse who were being supervised by Lord Carey. All right. So you have these two men.
Wow.
They are leaders in their own right, and they are doing everything they can to claim their freedom, and they do it for their families as well. And they joined the Baptist Church, First Baptist Church of Richmond. The church was integrated. The Baptists were at that time much more inclined towards questioning slavery, right? And more so than the Episcopalian and other denominations. So in Virginia, people who became Baptists, whether they were black or white, they accepted the idea that before God, we are equal. So the First Baptist Church of Richmond had both blacks and whites attending. Later on, they split, and the Black Baptists organized the First African Baptist Church of Richmond. But in the context of the Baptist Church, Carrie and Colin Teach were licensed to preach to Blacks. And that started their leadership, church leadership. But they were also going to classes at night to learn how to read and write. And they did that for about 3 years, but that was it. And then after they got the basics, they kept going, they kept reading and everything they could get their hands on and so forth. Again, I said to young people in Liberia, stop making excuses.
Yes.
When you got the basics, you can go, you can excel, you can motivate yourself. So they learned, and they were attending a meeting one evening, read a passage about a Baptist man in Sierra Leone named John Kizel. Kizel was cooperating with Paul Coffey, who wanted to bring African Americans to Freetown and establish trade back and forth. And so Kizel was from Sierra Leone. He had been enslaved in South Carolina. When the British and the Americans began fighting, he sided with the British. So when the war was over, the British took him to Freetown, back home to where he was from. And so Kizel had explained in a newspaper that more African Americans needed to come back to the continent. And that if they came, he would welcome them in Freetown, in Sierra Leone. And when Lakere and Teej read this, they said, you know what? We want to go. And we want to go as missionaries. But you see, before they left, they laid a foundation. They organized a missionary association. And they did. It was one of the very first missionary associations, in the South. And it was led by them. So they organized this association. People began contributing money. Many of them were white women, but most people who contributed were Blacks. So when they go to Freetown, yes. So then when they go to Freetown, they have some support coming in. It's not much, it's not government money. It's the widow's mite. And they are there and they start their mission. They convert a young Vi man that they meet in Freetown. And the man tells them, he says, I'm from down the coast, this area called Kipmount. He said, and you guys are looking for land, I can carry you to Kipmount, where my family is, for you to get land to open a school. So I will leave that story there and we'll come back to it later about what happened with Kipmount. But that was part of the beginning of this area known as Liberia becoming where the repatriates would settle. Because this young man was inviting them, come to the area where I'm from. We need what you have to offer. And they eventually, would open a school in Cape Mount. It didn't last long, but it did.
Right. But, as you tell the story, you see the conversion of the church and state as we've known it now, because back there in Richmond, Lakere and Colin learned how to read, and they became passionate about coming to this place in Africa. What happened with Kizel's story, but also what happened personally with Lakere was, his grandmother had impressed upon him that she wanted to come back to this place, but she was too old, and she wished her grandson would take on this task. And then, between First Baptist Church, there was a Second Baptist Church, and then the First African Baptist Church that you mentioned. The guy from First Baptist Church, his name is William Crane. Started with and 7 families, and they formed what is the Providence Baptist Church today. So the church was birthed as they looked at, bringing the gospel, coming, as free people, forming the land, starting the nation. But here in the center of all of this, they have formed a church.
Yes,
That they were coming with this church. Right, and
Indeed.
so by the time they got to Cape Montserrat, the story will pick up there with you later on.
Yes,
Is that
yes,
they said, look, we came as a church. So
Yes.
it was the church that came along with the other things. And what do we call this church? Providence, because God has
Yes.
now provided us a place. There comes the name Providence. And
Mm-hmm.
right in the middle of all of this
Mhm.
formation and freedom and coming to a new place.
Mhm.
I mean, God got a good sense God got a sense of humor.
Oh, yes,
I'm
yes,
also,
indeed.
I'm also thinking, Dr. Burrows, about some of the qualities that we've been talking about as it relates to leadership. Leaders, they persevere.
Right.
They're hardworking. Leaders are often what they do, they don't do just for themselves. Those men didn't
Big
buy
picture.
just their freedom,
Mhm.
exactly, they bought the
Mhm.
freedom of their families. And they're
Mhm.
also visionary. Leaders often go and do what either none have done before or only a
Mhm.
few. For those brothers to begin to think, we're gonna form this mission. Nobody had done
Yes.
that before. And to use whatever little bit they had to have enough faith to go out and make plans to go across the Atlantic to carry
Yes.
the gospel to their people. Again, going where few had gone before. Leaders are innovators. And leaders aren't ashamed to always be learning and growing.
Right.
These were adult men who needed to learn to read and write that they might be more competent
Right.
in their leadership. We've been talking
Amen.
about all these things over the past few weeks. These men exhibit these leadership qualities.
And as you make that connection, you will say something, Dr. Bora, but listen, they're Liberians now. This stuff was here in the very inception of who we are as a people,
Yes.
our early leaders.
Yes,
Why do we think that we're any less
yes.
the kind of people today than our forefathers and mothers were? So, and I think part of what we're trying to do here also is these qualities are part of who we are.
Yes.
You know, and like we challenge the young people and the old people is that, look, the qualities are here. Why have we just sometimes want to just sit on our hands or put our hands on our heads and think that we don't have what it takes to make this country all that God wants it to be?
Mhm.
Yes. No, absolutely. And I did want to go back, to your point, that the church was formed in Richmond. Crane was present and he was very active with them. But in part, that was because, during that period in the South, especially, Blacks could not assemble without a white sponsor or a person present. And he was always willing to play that role, whenever they were meeting to get their business done. And so he was instrumental in that respect.
I have a rendition from the Virginia Historical Society, the Richmond Historical Society, a rendition of a portrait of that meeting in Crane's living room that God, hopefully between now and December, we have it probably framed and put in our old church, and
Yes. And so, what people lose sight of is the fact that today, because we have buildings that contain our churches, contain our congregations, we confuse the buildings with the church. But the church was the people, were the members and the leaders.
Still is.
And they brought it with.
Right.
So now, Dr. Burrows, you said you were stopping the story now, but I want you to continue. We want to follow where it is you want to take us in the story and the leadership conversation. So
so we pick this up wherever we stop at 6 o'clock our time. We'll pick it up next week. So just keep going. And what we want to keep on is interject the leadership qualities and principles that these people brought that we think still is alive today that we need to remind ourselves of.
Yes.
So it is where I carry the story next, right? So what happens then is the U.S. government had passed a law banning the importation of African captives to America. And it said that if any ship was caught with Africans aboard being brought to America, the ship would be intercepted by the Navy, and that would be the end of the slave trade. They didn't end the enslavement of people in the South, but they were blocking the bringing of Africans into America. So the U.S. Navy had this charge to intercept these ships.
Yes.
But when the ships were intercepted, if they happened in the South, Southerners would try then to enslave those people. So Congress passed
Yes.
a law and put money aside and said, let the Navy try to find a place where those recaptives, those people liberated from slave ships, would now have a home. You couldn't just take somebody from the Congo who had been sold from the Congo and put them back there, because the same thing would happen. They needed a place where they would be safe. So the Navy was involved, and then the ACS was involved, saying that they were going to help African American free blacks to return. So they come and they negotiate to get this land. What a lot of Liberians don't know is that, and this is amazing, when I came across this, it absolutely blew my mind. I thought I knew our history, but I knew the history that we had been told. What Liberians don't know is that after the land was purchased, Stockton for the US Navy left immediately. Heirs who represented the ACS left. So people on Providence Island, those who had returned, and the folks who had been staying in Sierra Leone came there to join them. You follow me?
Yes.
Okay, they end up building houses on the hill to move up there. There were no whites involved.
Okay.
The people
Okay.
were left on their own during that period to get this work done. So Frederick James was the person in charge, left in charge during that period. And he was one of the repatriates from Virginia. And Lot Carey was there involved as well. So they built 20-something structures up the hill, thatched houses for the people to move in. And there were very few of them anyway, well, not that many. And so the basis, the foundation is laid for what will be become the town of Monrovia. But at that time, it was just called Cape Mesurado. And that Cape Mesurado town would become ultimately Liberia. But that base was laid with Frederick James in charge and Lot Carey as the person who was the religious leader among them. So the church and the state, the foundations were put in place by people who became Liberians themselves. Are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so the very first school established in this place we call Liberia was established by Lot Carey.
Right.
And that school was, listen to this, for the sons of the local rulers, indigenous
Yes.
children.
Okay.
Because Lot Carey, having interacted with indigenous Africans in Freetown before he came, converted that young man named John, was told that we want education, we want to be able to read and write the way you do, we want to know book. And he said, okay, if this is what our brothers and sisters want here, and we are going to live together, we're going to have to share with them what we have.
Yes.
And this was not a man who had a college degree, but it was like, the little that I know, I'm going to be able to give, and it will bring other people to a level where they desire to be. So they opened the school for the sons of local rulers, indigenous rulers.
Right.
Before, there was a school for the children of the repatriates, because the idea was, Lot Carey can read and write, he can teach his small children them to ABC as also. Colin Teach could read and write, he can teach the children in his house. But the children on the ground, you know, the indigenous children whose parents wanted them to learn to read and write, their parents didn't have those skills.
You know,
Later
I
on,
think
schools were built for the repatriate kids.
right, and I think there's an interjection right here also, an intersection rather, that sometimes when this, because the story has not been told properly too, it's sometimes when you wherever you read it or you hear it, it's like, you know, those schools were only built for the repatriates, for Lot Carey and those who came, and they cared nothing about the education
Yes.
of the local people. But here, all of that was happening. The first, I mean,
Yes.
thing, first schools was built for our brothers and
Yes.
sisters
Yes.
who they met here,
Yes.
and began the process of their education, which was as important to them as it was to the settlers,
Amen.
and yeah, that's a healing story intersection right there. It's a healing story as opposed to some of the stories we've heard in the past where the separatists, they only did for themselves, they only educated themselves, they didn't educate the folk they met here. So again, it's the retelling of the story, properly, and the intersection of these leaders who were great leaders, who were laying out qualities, godly qualities of leadership.
So we've got a comment too on the page that says the concept, you were talking about church and state. The concept, thank you, Miata, of a separation of church and state reinforces the legal right of a free people to freely live their faith, even in public, without fear of government coercion. Free exercise means you may have a faith and you may live it. Yet in our nation, you have to be afraid of state because if we speak out against it, then we are ostracized. That's a comment on the Facebook page.
That's deep, Doc, because she goes all the way back to history and comes back to current affairs, about some of the issues that's happening here. But I think the difference is told, in the West, in the States, this is, and I still call it the pseudo separation because I still think it's pseudo because those people are church folk there anyway. But here, our has from the very beginning been at this intersection. This church and state has been one in this nation. Want to say something?
Yeah. So I think the way that we conceive the relationship between our faith and the state, if you're involved in the state, is very different from how anybody else does. I mean, the way that the British conceive it is not the same as the way the Swedish or the Germans do.
Right.
But we tend not to look at the fact that Europeans and people in the West have different conceptions. It's almost like there's one universal way of doing it. Everybody has to do it that way. And the reality is that, our approach to those issues were different. And from the beginning, you had someone like Lord Carey, who was a missionary, and at times he was a leader of this infant society that was developing, right?
Yes.
Right.
He was head of development.
He was leader of the colony at one time. He was like the president of the country, so to speak, and pastor of the church at the same time. And then factor into that conversation is, even the current contemporary conversation about, church and state, whether, religious leaders should be involved in quote unquote politics and those kinds of things. So all of that play into the psyche of who we are, into our own humanity, so to speak, in terms of how we deal with it. And sometimes because we don't understand more than anywhere else that we as a people in a nation have come from this coming together of church and state, and we behave like that, and to try to separate us is to not understand who we are.
So we've got about 2 minutes now, so we need to wrap it up. Coming together of church and state. I also want to say coming together of people groups as well. There was not a separation in the beginning. There was literally a coming together.
Right.
Dr. Burroughs.
What I'd like to say to that, Laura, is this, right? I say this to Liberians all the time. When you meet a couple who are having problems in their relationship, the stories that you hear from them are going to be different than the stories you would have heard when they were getting together, when they were courting. I've heard this many, many times with people I know. And I had a friend who was explaining to me, how the problems he was having with his wife and this woman, all her bad qualities and all that. And I had been friends with both of them from the beginning. And I said, well, my man, you remember when you were courting this girl, all the good qualities that she had that you always would refer to? Sometimes you have to remind people that the end of the story or the journey 20 years later is not the same as the way the story started.
That's it.
Exactly.
That's
You
it.
don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And your role, a role of those who are leaders, is not to go along because everybody else is saying this or everybody else is thinking this. I mean, for me as a historian, I'm willing to say it, the hard truth. And what, people may not want to hear it, but it is what it is. And I would be remiss if I was to cover it up and to lie to people. So after the town was established, that became Monrovia, Lock Carey very quickly moved to set up a school in Cape Mount in the area that John had invited him to go to. And John Revy, Pastor Revy, was the person charged with running that school. So they opened the school in Cape Mount. It didn't last long, again, because of the slave trade. The area was attacked and the school ended up being closed. But guess what? One of the students from that school went on to invent the script for the Vai language.
Right.
He had attended the school long enough. You get me? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. You see our story that has been covered up and hidden for all these years? Yeah.
Right. As we come to the end, quickly you can go, we'll go back, we'll come back next week.
Yeah.
That script was used by the American government, the American Army in I think the First or the Second World War. And then we'll talk a little more about that script, how important it was to the work of the US military, in the history of our country. This is awesome. It's a good place to come to an end. We're right there, it's 6 o'clock, my goodness. Yes, you've been listening to Leading Leaders right here on Radio Harvest Intercontinental 103.5. And we're talking about the history of our country as Providence celebrates 200 years of the founding of the church and the church being here. And we're looking forward to the nation as a nation, us celebrating 200 years in 2022 of the return of repatriates of our brothers and sisters who have come back to the land of their ancestors. And we've been having, almost want to say His Excellency, yes, yeah, he is, Dr. C. Patrick Boros, who's going to be with us over the next few weeks as we also invite other historians as we intersect all of this. And I think, Ms. Laura, quickly, I know they want us to wrap up real soon. We will begin to get some of the leaders of the bicentennial for the nation next year on this program, maybe to even intersect and interact with Dr. Boros and others. And I think it will help the national narrative as we talk about this. So thank you very much, Dr. Boros. Awesome start. We're looking forward again to having you come right on board next week. And we'll pick this thing up from where we left it. In the last words, Ms. Laura.
Thank you, Dr. Burrows. And I just want to say, leaders, if we look back and learn, we can move forward better. And I'm reminded of what you spoke about in August, Dr. Burrows, and what is it, an old vision for a new Liberia. This is what we're talking about. We got to go back to the old landmark, if you will, get that old vision for the building of a new Liberia. And leaders, you are the ones who will lead the way in doing this.
Right. Hey, leaders out there, the vision has been around. It's still here. We have quality people from the inception of our nation to now. Let's pick up those qualities and run with it and make our nation better. Thank you very much. We'll see you again on the other side next week. Thank you very much, Dr. Barber. And we'll catch up again next week and we'll pick up Leading Leaders. Let's continue to lead where we are. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.
All right.